Here we go with chapter 18. All right, we finished off with... They just started getting used to things, said Mary. They're not ready to leave. That, said Ben, is not our problem. So I'm really interested to know what you kids thought you would do in this situation. If you were one of the leaders of Sparks, what would you recommend? What would you suggest to the fellow leaders? What would you vote for? What should be done with the Sparks people? There's some problems popping up. People are getting frustrated. There's tension building. What would you do? You're the leader. You got to figure out something. Here we go. Chapter 18. Caspar's Quest. On the last night of their journey to the city, the travelers stayed in a real house. It was roofless, but most of its walls still stood, providing shelter from the wind that blew strongly off the water. There was no furniture in the house, of course. They sat on the bare floor. Caspar was excited that night. He talked so much that he almost forgot to eat. His third traveler's cake sat on his knee, getting cold. At one point, he turned to face Lina. "Now listen," he said. "I'm going to tell you something, so you'll understand the importance of what we're doing." He paused, then he spoke in a low, vibrating voice. "I happen to know," he said, "that there is a treasure in the city." "There is?" said Lina. "How do you know?" "Old rhymes and songs speak of it," said Caspar. "The trouble is," said Maddie, "those old rhymes and songs don't make sense anymore, if they ever did." "Well, they make sense to me," Caspar said, "but that's because I've studied them carefully and have found out their deeper meaning." "What do the old rhymes say?" Lina asked. "Various things," said Caspar, "depending on what version you hear, but they're always about a treasure in an ancient city." He looked into the air and sang tunelessly, "There's buried treasure in the ancient city. Remember, remember from times of old." One of them starts like that. "Well, why hasn't anyone searched for the treasure before?" asked Lina. "I'm sure many have," Caspar said, "but no one has found it." "How do you know?" Lina asked. "Because, obviously, if someone had, we would have heard about it." Lina thought about this. She saw some holes in Caspar's logic. Someone could have found the treasure, taken it away, and never said a word. "Another problem," said Maddie, "is that these rumors never say what city that treasure is in. It could be some city 1,000 miles away." Caspar gave an exasperated sigh and set down his cup of water. He raised 2 fingers and pointed them at Maddie. "Listen," he said. "Be logical. It's here that the rumors are passed around. I've never heard them in the far north, where I was last year. I've never heard of them in the far east either. This talk of treasure is in a city. I hear it here, and within 100 or so miles of here." "Still," Maddie said, "there are at least 3 ancient cities within 100 miles of here." "But only one great ancient city," said Caspar. "That's the one we're going to." "A city is big," Lina said, remembering the myriad streets and buildings of Ember. "How will you know where in the city to look for the treasure?" A crafty look came over Caspar's face. He smiled, with his lips pressed together and his eyes narrowed. "That's where my careful study comes in," he said. "Many, many hours of study. I've written down every version of the rhyme I've heard, which is a great many, 47 to be exact. I've compared them, word for word, letter for letter. Then..." Caspar paused. He looked at them in a way Lina recognized. It was the same way Torin looked when he was about to make a big impression. "Then I applied my skill with numbers." "Numbers?" said Lina. "That's right. What you do is you count the letters in the words. You count in all different ways until you see a pattern. The pattern is the key to the code. The code tells you the secret of the message. He sat back, looking highly pleased with himself. And the secret of the message? Said Lina, confused. Is the location of the treasure, of course. Caspar slapped a hand on his big thigh. It's obvious once you figured it out. Street numbers, building numbers, it's all there. Well then, said Maddie, what is the location of the treasure? Caspar jerked his head back. You think I'd tell you? He said. I thought I was your partner in this, said Maddie. You'll know when it's time, said Caspar. Until then, the information stays strictly with me. Lina glanced at Maddie in time to see her rolling her eyes towards the sky. That night, Lina couldn't sleep. Animal sounds kept her awake, scrambling and snuffling just beyond the walls, and a strange hooting in the distance. Dark thoughts troubled her too. Caspar's search sounded all wrong somehow. She didn't want to tell him. The thought of it filled her with dread. She lay on the hard floor of the house, staring at the black sky, feeling worse and worse, until finally she decided she must try to think about something else. So she said to herself over and over for a long time, tomorrow I'll see the city. Tomorrow I'll see the city. They traveled the next day, mile after mile, along a road that was nearly straight, though they had to trace a winding path around the places where the pavement was pitted or thrust up or crumbled away. On their right was the vast green sheet of water, bordered by waving grasses where great white birds stood knee-deep in pools and rose like floating paper, and flocks of blackbirds flew up, trilling into the air, their shoulders red as blood. On the left was a forest of trees so thick they hid all but the briefest glimpses of the ruined buildings among them. Lina's excitement was rising. She rode standing up now. She climbed back into the crate and stuck her feet between the third and fourth slats on the side, which put her at the right height for holding on to the top edge and looking forward. She could see over Caspar's and Maddie's heads to the rear ends of the oxen, their sharp hip bones sticking up, left, right, their tasseled tails switching back and forth. The sun sank lower in the sky until it was directly ahead, blazing straight into Lina's eyes. We'll be there before the night, Caspar said. The road began to slope upward. Hills rose on either side, and soon Lina could no longer see the water, just the brown humps of hills spotted with clumps of trees and scarred here and there by the remains of old roads and buildings. The air was cooler. They rounded a curve, and all at once the city lay before them. Ooh, exciting part. Number one, for your questions, we're going to do 2 important events or things learned. Number 2, do you believe Caspar? Why or why not? And number 3, you're going to have to do some art, take a picture, and post it into your slide. Number 3, draw a picture of what Lina sees. What is going through her mind. All right. So here you go. Number 1, you're going to open up, obviously you're going to open up your new slide in your Spark slideshow. And the first question you're going to answer is, what are 2 important events or things that you learned in this chapter? Number 2, you're going to write a few sentences. Do you believe Caspar on his mission? Are there any holes in his theories? Why do you believe him, or why do you not believe him? So you're going to have to explain that. And number 3, draw a picture of what Lina sees in this last paragraph, where it says, the road began to slope upward. Hills rose on either side, and soon Lina could no longer see the water, just brown humps of hills spotted with clumps of trees and scarred here and there by the remains of old golden buildings. The air was cooler. They rounded a curve. This is the part. They rounded a curve, and all at once the city lay before them. Ooh. So you're going to draw a picture of that scene that Lina sees around that curve. And do a little sentence at the bottom. What's one thought that's going through her mind when she sees it? So you're going to draw the picture out, and then a little sentence at the bottom, what's going through Lina's mind. There's your job for chapter 18. I'm excited to see what happens next. Later.